Hello, I'm Mariette DiCristina, and I'm the Dean of Boston University's College of Communication. I'm also an alum of COM and a parent of a recent BU grad. Welcome to today's event, Communication Leadership in a Challenging Era. This event is being recorded. Today's panel is part of a regular series of virtual events that we began this spring at COM, bringing together expert perspectives on how professionals are approaching communication in a changing world. You can find future events on COM's website and hope you can join lots of them. The theme for today actually grew out of an e-chat that I had with one of our panelists, Professor Gary Sheffer, about our expectations of companies and how they've shifted against the recent backdrop of the coronavirus shutdowns and of the horrible events and subsequent national conversations that we've been having around racism and injustice. Trust, shared values, and genuine actions are coming to the fore, and there's an impatience with anything that doesn't feel authentic and purposeful. We talked a bit about how businesses need to respond and how chief communication officers, the people in companies who have the broadest view outside of CEOs, really need to step up to lead. So each of our three speakers is going to provide you with amazing expert insights from their perspective, and there'll also be plenty of time for questions. And when you ask your questions, please put them in the Q&A box that you can see in the bottom, not the chat box. And I'll read those out loud when we get to them, but please feel free to add your questions in at any time. And now it's my genuine pleasure to introduce each of our speakers. I'll read their bios so you can get to know them just a bit about them before they then come on and share their presentations afterward. The first speaker for today is going to be Gary Sheffer, who is the Sandra R. Fraser Professor of Public Relations at COM. Prior to BU, Gary was Chief Communication Officer at General Electric for 13 years. And while at GE, Gary was elected as Chair of the Board of the Arthur W. Page Society, the premier organization for senior communicators. He also serves on the boards of the Arthur W. Page Center for Integrity in Public Communications and the Institute for Public Relations. Gary began his career as a journalist at several newspapers before becoming a press officer to 2 New York governors and serving in political campaigns. He's been named to the PR Week and PR News Halls of Fame and won the Jack Felton Medal for Lifetime Achievement for Excellence in Public Relations from the Institute for Public Relations. Gary, welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you. You can see how authentic we are already.
Yes, exactly.
Our next speaker will be Mariana Agathalkas, a COM grad in 2003, who is head of communications for Verizon Business, one of 3 business units at Verizon with 30,000 employees and $30 billion in global business, and vice president of corporate communication for Verizon, overseeing corporate communications, executive communications, public policy, crisis, network, and 5G priorities. Previously, Mariana led the MTV communications team, capping off a decade-plus long career with the millennial and Gen Z-focused brand. Her work spanned the award-winning Rock Band video game franchise, Emmy Award-winning public affairs campaigns, linear and digital-based documentary and series publicity, MTV News, major events like MTV Video Music Awards, social media initiatives, and more. Mariana began her career at Porter Novelli in Washington, D.C. and New York City, working with clients including Business Roundtable, Safeway, Timberland, Chapstick, and the College Board. Welcome, Mariana.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
So great to have you. And third in our speakers, last but not least, as they say, is Jane Carpenter, who earned her MS in Public Relations at COM and now leads global communications for Wayfair, a Fortune 500 e-commerce company with 16,000 employees, and the brands Wayfair, Joss & Main, All Modern, Birch Lane, and Paragold. Jane has played a key role in driving Wayfair's brand building initiatives, including establishing its social media presence across all brands, developing a robust influencer relations network, and building Wayfair's corporate social responsibility platform and related programs. Prior to joining Wayfair, Jane led the consumer engagement practice at Pan Communications and served in public relations roles at Schwartz Communications, MSL Group, and Louis Paul and Partners. She is a board, Lois Paul and Partners, excuse me, slip of the tongue. She is a board member for the Big Sister Association of Greater Boston and is active in the PR Club of New England. She was recognized in 2016 as a member of the PR Week Hall of Fame, honoring trailblazers in the communication industry. How nice to have you, Jane.
Thank you. Happy to be here today.
So welcome to our three speakers. And the first one up is Professor Sheffer. Please take it away, Gary.
Great. I'm going to share my screen. It's great to talk to students again. I haven't seen you since April, and others on the webinar. Great to meet all of you as well too. So I'm going to just sort of try to frame this a little bit since I'm the first speaker and I'm the only one not actually practicing PR right now of our panelists. And so I'll try to get this done quickly so that Mariana and Jane can tell you really what they're going through in this era. So communicators today are facing changing jobs. It changes, and I would say thankfully, just about every year or so. When I joined GE back in the late 90s, communications was really a news service. And my job was to keep 3 or 4 journalists happy. That was in the Jack Welch era of GE. And of course, today it's expanded to include everything from culture to news, reputation, public affairs, brand marketing, content. And what I want to talk about today, quickly using 2 examples, are 2 things in this era that Marriott described that I think are rising to the top of the responsibilities for chief communications officers and everybody on the communications teams, and not just in big corporations, but in not-for-profit enterprises, government, elsewhere. And so I'm going to provide 2 examples, one on culture, and then on this dynamic between long-termism and short-termism, particularly in public companies that are traded around the world. And this is one I love, by the way. This is what you'll find on the Yum China website, is this illustration. And Joey Watt is the CEO of Yum China, and it's KFC and Pizza Hut. And by the way, it's the biggest chain restaurant in China. And I pulled this out of a piece in Fortune the other day about companies and regions that have already gone through COVID and some of the lessons they learned from it. And you can see what Joey Watt, the feeling there is, forget about making money for now. Well, you know, that would raise a gasp in a lot of places, a lot of boardrooms, that for the near term, profitability has to be put aside as we try to rebuild companies, rebuild markets, open up our society. And I wanted to use this to illustrate a dynamic, again, for public companies, publicly traded companies, that I think is going to be very challenging going forward, and not just related to COVID, but to the racial issues we're seeing, the economic recession that we're going to be going through as a result of COVID. And it's this short-term attitude versus long-term. Who does a company serve, and how can they balance those 2 things? When I joined GE, Jack Welch was the CEO of the year, the manager of the century. My students don't even know who he is today, by the way, you know, which Jack will spin in his grave if he knew that. But it was the time of share owner prominence, right? You did everything you could to maximize the profit and the value you deliver to share owners. Now, we've seen a big change in that, particularly over the past few years with the Business Roundtable and other CEOs saying, no, we have to serve all stakeholders. At the same time, we've seen the rise of activist shareholders who say, I want a return now. I want more value now. So that's the short-term side of the equation. On the other side is the rise in longer term, which I'm going to talk about more, longer-term perspective on behalf of company and delivering social value to a wide variety of stakeholders. And so I thought this was interesting that a CEO of a Chinese company understands that right now profitability may not be the most important thing. Secondly, the other thing that I think is rising to the top for communicators is culture. When I became a CCO, if you tried to get into culture work with HR, they would tell you to talk to the hand, right? You know, that's my gig, Gary. If there's something I want you to announce, I will send it to you and you can write it up here, write my newsletter for me. But you can see, this is Rakuten, the Japanese electronics commerce company. I think it used to be Ebates or part of it. And this is the CEO, again, in this fortune piece saying working from home is very, very efficient, but also makes some employees feel isolated and lonely. And then yesterday I read a piece, a friend of mine, Andrew Hill, writes for the Financial Times. He also sees this as a major challenge for companies going forward. He wrote about bore out, B-O-R-E, bore out instead of burnout, right? This idea that as we go forward and we're going to be possibly because of COVID in this situation where people are not in social situations, that employees are feeling disconnected, they're feeling lonely, there are mental health challenges. And Andrew wrote that the burden of motivating staff through the featureless desert ahead will again fall to managers. And that includes us, communicators. Can they sustain the shared sense of mission through the long, flat grind of the coming months? But I'm bringing everybody down here, I realize this. But again, communications, CCOs, communications leaders are now partners with HR leaders and the C-suite on driving culture across the organization. So those two things, that dynamic between long-term, short-term, and culture, I see coming to a head. Back to the long-term versus short-term and some of the decisions that need to be made about how a company behaves and how they do business. Walmart's a great company. I have great respect for them. You can see here Doug McMillon, their CEO, responding to the George Floyd situation and the call for more racial equality, said, we'd like to surge within Walmart. I assume that means more diverse people and more broadly in a way that results in lasting change. And then on the right side of the screen, you see something from The Atlantic last week by Amanda Mull talking about brands really having nothing meaningful to say. Now, let's take the example of Walmart. They've given $100 million to organizations to fight racism across financial, economic, social programs, which is very admirable, quite admirable. If you were doing systems thinking, if you were thinking about this more broadly, and I'm sure Walmart is, you would say, how could that money be put to real advantage to get at the underlying issues? Walmart's the biggest employer in the United States. Their average pay for an hourly worker is $14.26. They have no Black, African-American senior executives in the company. So Mariette talked about this, which is this difference between how we've responded to crises in the past, which is usually with money or some kind of announcement or statement. Today, everyone wants to see action. And in a recent poll by Morning Consult and others, they most want to see how you're going to be treating your employees, whether you're protecting them, whether you're promoting them, whether you're helping them. And I'll go fast here. So it is my belief that we're entering the age of corporate social justice. I think CSR, corporate social responsibility, we went through a brief period of ESG. And I do believe, and this is from the Harvard Business Week this week, Lily Zhang, who's a terrific writer on these kind of corporate topics, corporate social justice is a reframing of CSR that focuses on helping people facing injustice and a disadvantage by society. So if that's the case, which I believe is, and I'm sure my other panelists will have based on their slides, can weigh in on this. Communicators have to help their organizations understand what issues do we pick? What injustices do we focus on? And that comes from knowing your company, knowing your values, knowing your people. All of the things that I didn't have to do at the beginning of the time that I served as a CCO. And I really do believe this era of corporate social justice is going to have some legs and be long lasting. So if you believe that, and I'll finish quickly here, then we have to start here. Are companies really ready to advocate that we fundamentally change capitalism if we don't believe it is serving all stakeholders? It seems to me the Business Roundtable has already said yes to that answer, the big organization of CEOs. Are we ready to take on government responsibilities in an era when government has been largely dysfunctional? It seems to me that the answer is yes, based on some of the statements I've seen. And if the answers are yes, we need to redefine the purpose of our organizations, why we exist. We need to saturate the enterprise with purpose, the culture I just talked about. We need to measure, refine it, and live it. Again, led in part by the CEO, the CCO, and other members of the C-suite. Now, here's today's CCO. I use a beautiful picture of myself. As with all profile pictures, that's probably 5 or 6 years old. So, take it for what it's worth. But here's some studies on how CCOs are feeling today. They're confident in a PR Week, Boston University study that we do every year. They say they're valued in their organizations. That's a win for communications. They say they're really busy, and that's a study that the Page Society put together. They are in demand, again, from the PR Week BU study. Boards, senior executives are looking for greater accountability and measurement, and 40% say, I'm moving faster than the other people in my organization, so they're somewhat frustrated. And then lastly, being a communicator, being a CCO is a relentless, nerve-wracking, but great job. What I've just told you is hard, but think about it. Think about the power and the impact that you can have in society. And this is, I'm talking to the students now, I'm sorry. These jobs have changed completely, where you can do all the things you see here on the page. I talked about being a systems thinker. To do these things, you have to be courageous inside the organization. You have to know your company. But most of all, if you're a point of trust inside the organization, if people know you, they trust you, they come to you with problems and ideas, it gets reflected in the communications that you do with stakeholders. So I went through that quickly, but I'm a big believer that the CCO job is one of the most important ones in the corporate world right now for the reasons I've just gone through. Is that good, Mariette?
That was excellent, Gary. Thank you.
All right.
I especially love the calls to act courageously and be a point of trust. I think those are so important. Awesome. Thank you.
I'll stop sharing.
Now I would love to, after you've stopped sharing, invite Mariana to take us through her remarks. Thank you, Mariana.
Hello, everyone. All right, here we go. Excellent. First, Dean DeChristina, thank you so much for having me here today. I often talk about how BU and COM specifically set me up for my career, and I'm really excited to be talking to the next generation of COM alumna and alumni to come out of it. Professor Shefford, I can tell you that your last slide is 100% accurate. These last 100+ days have been some of the most intense of my entire career, and they've also been some of the most rewarding. So that balance is certainly there. And Jane, welcome. I just have to say, I think I've been one of Wayfair's best customers this entire period of time, enjoying taking my mind off of things by buying things for my house. So there you go. To all of you, hello. I think it's very safe to say that communications as a profession has changed as much in the last few months as it has previously in the last few years. I wanted to start today with an oldie but a goodie, and both Dean DiChristina and Professor Sheffer touched on this. Trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and forever to repair. And I think this is just one of the most important things for communications professionals to remember today. If somebody breaks trust with your brand, it is so incredibly hard to get that back. And something interesting has been happening the last couple of years. Edelman puts out a trust barometer every year, and they've actually been measuring it more closely in the last few months to see what the impact of COVID at the start, and I would say now with racial justice movements, the impact that has had. The interesting thing here for communicators is that business is actually ranking above government and media. And what that means for all of us is that we can actually use every single tool in our belt to get our messages across and engage with our different stakeholders. Tools like owned and operated websites, your apps, your social handles, video streaming services, VOD platforms, earned media, kind of the bedrock of what we all do for sure. If we look at the new playbook that I referred to, at Verizon, we talk a lot about our customers' frame of mind. And in the last 100 days, what we've realized is that there's 3 frames of mind that any customer stakeholder is feeling at any given moment in time. The first is a react frame mind. This was probably most important at the beginning and onset of COVID, especially stay-at-home orders, where you're really trying to help people understand what's going on. You're trying to stay ahead of the narrative, and you're trying to get to them absolutely any which way you can. For rebound, this is when you kind of start to believe that, okay, there's some sense of normalcy coming. This is where you can empower people. As a communicator, you can really start to drive a narrative, and you can really start to have some fun and mix your existing and emerging platforms. For reimagine, this is really where you see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you can actually inspire people to think what the future holds for them. And I think this is one of those that is actually so critical today, because to Gary's point, we're all going through something, and we've never been through anything like this in our past, in our lifetime. And reimagination is where you can kind of make people believe. All 3 of these frames of minds are built on 2 really important foundations. The first today is executive visibility. Now, that has always been true for every CCO throughout history. But what's changed about it today is that as isolated and as far as we feel from each other, we are craving that human voice, that face, that feeling, that emotion more than ever. And that's a big opportunity for executives to be able to step up to the plate. The second is responsible business. Today, we live in a world where, rightfully so, we are judged by the actions we take, and it's critical that comms professionals have a seat at the table to sometimes raise their hand and say, that business's decision isn't necessarily the responsible thing to do. Now at Verizon, we had a new CEO start about 2 years ago now. And one of the first things he did was name 4 key stakeholders for us. Why is that a big deal? Prior to that, Verizon really focused on 3: employees, customers, and shareholders. Hans Vestberg, who took over as CEO, named society as our 4th stakeholder. And I have to tell you, that's made a huge difference in terms of the culture of the organization and how we all think. What this also does is it allows us to make really quick decisions in the moment as to the goals that we have for each stakeholder group. So if we go back in time to the start of COVID, keeping our employees healthy and safety was priority number 1. At the same time, we had to worry about serving our customers because Verizon is a critical service, especially in an environment where everyone's staying home. We moved very quickly into action about how we could start to help communities. And we also were very thoughtful about taking proactive business positions. That includes being one of the few companies to announce that we were actually increasing our CapEx guidance for the year because we were going to invest during this time, not retract. To go through a couple quick examples of how this has all looked like for me the last couple days. When we started with our reaction phase, one of the first things we did was launch a live daily telecast with our CEO and head of HR that was live streamed on Twitter for the entire world to see. This has continued to be an invaluable tool in terms of reaching all 135,000 employees at Verizon, and gives us a platform where when we really need to share something with everyone, they tune in. One of the other things we did, which I'm super proud of, is we launched a program called Pay It Forward Live. Small businesses are one of the communities most impacted by COVID today and by continued social unrest. And this program was specifically designed to help raise money for small businesses around the country up to $7.5 million. We also made a pledge to keep America connected, which meant that any consumer or small business owner who was having difficulty paying their bill because of COVID could call in and we would extend it for 60 days and not cut off service. I think that was super important. And then my personal kind of labor of love, which Gary speaks to your point about the impact that the communications team can actually have on a company the size of Verizon. We were able to move very quickly as a comms organization to connect 7 hospitals in the New York City area with 9 small business owned restaurants, fund the restaurants for a month fully, and have them deliver over 80,000 meals to frontline healthcare workers. It was one of those things where for the team, I mean, I remember the day that we launched it, we all literally started crying with each other because that's how emotional we felt about it. And if you look at it from an external point of view, we've received such amazing coverage, kudos. We were able to expand it to Detroit with the help of Ford. And most recently, we just expanded it to El Paso and San Diego, which are 2 communities that are starting to face an emerging outbreak. Also, being from Verizon right now, the network was the thing everyone wanted to talk to us about. Would the network hold up? Can we please make sure we can all stay connected? And I have to tell you, it was one of those things where we kept saying it. We believe the network's going to be fine. And I'm not sure anyone quite believed us. Happy to report that not only has the network held up amazingly well, but we've been able to maintain pre-COVID network reliability levels. And when you talk to trust, it is what you say and what you do, but it's also how your product performs. If you look at some of these numbers, I mean, mind-blowing. 10.3 trillion megabytes of data. That's insane. If you look at the bottom box, the different increases in usage. I mean, literally massive and dramatic usage spikes and shifts, which on the back end, if anyone ever wants to geek out with me, actually means our network engineers were working 24/7 and harder than ever to make sure that they could maintain all of those shifting needs. Now, the other thing I wanted to touch on in terms of React is the recent murder of George Floyd and our reaction to that. I have to tell you the truth here. We had a lot of conversation internally about how we should do this, what we should say. And what ended up coming across is our CEO essentially sat down the weekend after the first Friday of massive protests. He wrote something himself. He read it to his family. I think they all ended up in tears. And he decided that Monday morning to deliver it to a prearranged leadership forum that essentially had the top 300 executives of Verizon virtually present together. When we all saw Hans's delivery of that statement, what we realized was that's the vehicle that we have to use to share this with the world. We did also share a written version of it, but again, in a world today where we really crave that human emotional connection, it was probably one of the best decisions that we ever made. And the most important thing is we attached immediate action to it, which was a $10 million donation to aid social justice organizations. But since then, we have actually started to roll out a full racial justice action plan that will continue for years and years to come. I'm really proud of that. All right, so we take ourselves out of react mode, and now we start to talk about moments in time where everyone was a little bit more open to business as usual, life as usual, getting comfortable with the fact that we're all stuck working in our homes every single day. And this is where it became a really healthy mix of activities. Everything from business as usual, like powering the first ever virtual NFL draft, we would have done that in person or virtually, to continuing to launch some new initiatives that really helped different customers of ours along the way. So whether that was writing a white paper on the workplace of the future in about 6 business days, which if you've ever written a white paper is record time, to hosting a commencement series that actually just culminated last week with Hans and President Clinton, where we basically used LinkedIn Live as a great platform for engagement and live streaming, then put those videos on demand on Yahoo, which is part of the Verizon Media family. And to date, we've seen over 3.5 million streams of it. So again, that was something that was homegrown by the communications team. It helped give our executive a leadership voice, but most importantly, it allowed us a platform to offer others that as well. So when you work for a technology company, reimagining the future is actually a big part of your day job. For the duration of my career at Verizon, which is coming up on about 3 years now, you know, we've talked a lot about how things are never going to be the same. And I think if we all stop and consider what our world looks like right now, it's safe to say they're never going to be the same. There's this thing called 5G out there. 5G is the next generation technology that is going to fuel the 4th industrial revolution. And I know that sounds like really big words, but I really, really mean it. If you think about what has happened in the last few months in regards to telemedicine or distance learning, do you think we'll go sit in a doctor's office again the way that we did previously? Probably not. For Dean DiCristina, I imagine that this is a huge topic of conversation in regards to what happens in the fall, but you know, is it a mix of in-person, distance learning? How are you helping students round out their experiences? What if you can't get on a plane to go to that semester abroad? How can AR and VR transport you there to experience things? These are all of the ideas and use cases that are now out there. And what's been so fascinating is that if you look at the last 3 months, we've probably come further in those 3 months in regards to digital transformation as a society than we could in 3 years previously. And this is where, again, it really comes down to understanding and knowing how you can ebb and flow between these 3 kinds of mind frames to serve your stakeholders in their moment of need, and then also help your company, which is your job. So to close, I think from my very first day on the job as a comms professional, what I've loved about this gig is that I wake up every morning and I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. No clue. And I think that is never more true than it is today, where literally you don't know what you're waking up to every morning. But what's really exciting about it is the amount of tools now at our disposal, and I think also the real impact that we can have. Dean DiCristina, back over to you.
Thanks a million, Mariana. I mean, you raised so many excellent points there, and you know, I just think of how, and it's true, you started off by saying, you know, we've never been through anything like this together, and yet ultimately, as we sort of lean into it, if I can use that expression, and find our path forward, your remarks ended up being very, very inspiring about our ability to shape our futures as we do this as well. So thank you so much. And I'm really delighted and excited to hear Jane's presentation. Thank you so much, Jane, for joining us today.
Sure, thanks for having me. I'm really excited. I think Professor Schaefer and Mariana hit on some really great themes already to start with, things that really, I think, resonated with me, and I would kind of echo those same thoughts in a lot of senses. One is the fact that, you know, certainly this job is different every single day. I completely agree with that. You never know what to expect. And I think that's what keeps me so engaged day to day, is that it's always different, it's always challenging, and I'm always learning. So that's a really exciting piece. I have a few slides I'll share, and kind of some of the themes are similar to what we've gone through, but I think that will be a nice setup for the discussion. So,
Yeah, while Jane is doing that, let me just remind you, feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A box whenever you get a chance.
Yeah, so I think, we've kind of talked a little bit about how, we're living in unprecedented times. There is no playbook for communicators. That's certainly true. And it's, what do you do when you're dealing with something that's never happened again? You can't just call up some seasoned PR pro and get all the answers from their past learnings. We're reinventing that playbook every day. So, some of the things I think are really important, and kind of the main theme I want to hit on is really that leading through action and communicating with empathy. And I think it's, that came up earlier, that human voice, the human touch, listening and learning and understanding your stakeholders is so critical now more than ever. I think also words matter more than ever, right? But I think actions still speak louder than words. So it's really about that. And in these situations where there are things happening that we've never dealt with as a country, as a world, whatever it may be, I think it's recognizing that our stakeholders are really craving information, they're craving guidance. And for communicators, we like to have the facts first, right? We'd like to have all that information, but a lot of times now, no one has the facts, right? So I think it's about reminding ourselves that, you can't over communicate in these situations. Even if you're communicating that you don't know something, that's better than not communicating anything at all. And being able to admit that and be transparent and be honest and talk about how you're looking to find the information or who you're working with to navigate a situation. But remembering that your stakeholders need to hear from you, they need to hear from you quickly. And so, sometimes you don't have all the information yet. Sometimes, you don't have days and weeks to put together a big strategy, right? So you have to have the right balance there. And that's a really important theme, I think, that we'll probably hit on a lot in the discussion. And I think, the honesty and transparency piece, has never been more important. So I'm going to walk through a little bit kind of how Wayfair sort of tackled the COVID situation and still dealing with the COVID situation from a communication standpoint. Certainly stakeholder communication, never more critical than ever before. We quickly transitioned thousands of our corporate workers into work from home, as well as all of our customer service folks. And you can imagine all the concerns and issues that come with that. People who didn't have childcare, having the right equipment at home, having wireless, having internet access, all those great services that Verizon provides. So all of those things are big questions and big concerns, and just an immense communications effort on that front. And then, of course, our frontline employees, right? So we have thousands of folks who are working on the front lines who can't work at home. E-commerce was deemed an essential operation during this period of time. And so our number one concern was the safety of our employees and our customers, of course. So we had to quickly implement new safety protocols. And as you guys all know, those things were all evolving and changing as everyone was looking to the CDC and other organizations to guide that. So that was a really immense effort to not only get those procedures and policies in place, but make sure they were communicated out to folks, and working with our teams with great empathy, understanding that people were worried and people were scared. And it was really important to kind of be right there with them. And so by doing all that, we were able to maintain our operations and actually transition very, very efficiently and effectively. And so the great part about that is that put us in a really strong position to be able to help the community, right? So it was like, focus on your employees, focus on your people. And that's where we like to start everything, and then kind of build from there. One of the themes I think is bigger than ever now is that, internal comms is external comms. There's really no barrier or wall between those two things. There was a day when there were separate departments, but these days, what you do internal is external. It is who you are, and you have to recognize that in everything you do. And so, this communication piece was really, really important and enabled us to get in a good place where we could really help our communities and stakeholders. So I thought I stole this meme on the internet, but I thought it was kind of funny. You guys can probably all relate, right? you know, it's the coronavirus, and every company you ever bought something from is sending you an email about what they're doing. And, you know, and so that is helpful to a certain extent, but I think the big question tends to be like, all right, well, what are you guys actually doing? I wanted to provide some examples of how we were able to quickly help the community. Like I said, because we did keep our operations up and running and we were keeping our people safe. You know, we had the ability to reach out to state and federal, local government agencies to offer, whether it be supplies for field hospitals, or it would be, you know, trucking capabilities or warehousing for PPE and things like that. And immediately we're able to reach out to these different organizations and leaders to offer these services. And, you know, we weren't doing this with any intention for recognition, but this is kind of a cool example of how, you know, you do something nice and things come back to you in this world. And nice quote from Andrew Cuomo to his 2.2 million followers. You know, we were completely shocked, right, to see that, but it was kind of a nice acknowledgement. You know, we worked with setting up field hospitals around the country, getting massive volumes of product to those locations super quickly so they could be set up. We helped with the city of Boston setting up a field hospital at the Boston Convention Center. We helped with set up a field hospital in New Orleans. A really cool project with the Boston Medical Center where we helped to furnish an area to house COVID patients who were homeless and didn't have a place to go quarantine and recover and get better, right? So we were able to help set that up, which was super great and you know, just really rewarding for our teams, right? Our frontline teams who were working every day and it's a nervous situation and their families are worried and everybody's worried because we don't know what's going on. And it was just a really great feeling that they could be empowered to help with these things in their local communities. And then another program that, I'll go on something else soon, but another program that I'm particularly proud of, and it speaks to the whole point of kind of the comms team jumping in and leading things and innovating things. This is a program that my team, a corporate communications team, completely managed and got off the ground and continues to run to this day. And it's a pretty immense program. And the idea was we wanted to find additional recognition, ways to support our frontline teams. You know, we had done the additional pay recognition and things like that. We were doing all the policies to keep them safe, such as, you know, paid time off if anyone wasn't feeling well and making sure everybody knew that they were going to get paid if they had to stay home, if they were sick, all of those great things. But we also recognize, like, this is such a stressful time. It's a stressful time for families. Like, what can we do to just make life a little easier? So we partnered with local restaurants in our different communities. So all over the country, 50 locations where we have warehouses, we have delivery networks and driver teams. Mostly these are like small towns with lots of mom and pop small restaurants that were really struggling. I think you guys all know the restaurant industry was hit particularly hard, and certainly these small businesses. And we were able to kind of go into the community and partner with 2 or 3 restaurants in each location to give our employees these free meals, which of course Wayfair was paying for. So we were giving hundreds of orders a week to restaurants that were on the cusp of going out of business, or were about to close, or had to lay off, you know, dozens of people. And kind of, it was just like an amazing kind of win-win opportunity where we could help those communities. Our employees loved it. It's been amazing for morale. They love the program, but the thing they love the most is that they're actually part of helping these local small businesses and restaurants that they truly love. So we've extended that program through the end of September, and it's just been really great and also rewarding for the comms team, right? So as communicators, you don't think you're going to get to do something like this. And, you know, then this was no easy lift or task with the volume and size of it. And the team really jumped in, was able to troubleshoot and build a program and turn it around in just a matter of days and deploy it to 50 locations. And we've also deployed it in Europe. So just a really cool, it's like, I think all of these situations are challenging, but they do create opportunity for us in the communication field and as communications leaders and teams that is really kind of unprecedented. Because action is such an important part of this. It's so integral, and you've got to be at the table. You've got to be an innovator. You've got to be creative. You're coming up with these ideas. You're a partner in this with the C-suite. And I think that's just a really, really exciting place to be for communicators. And then this last slide I thought was kind of interesting. You know, pivoting a little bit more to now, what we're all focused on so critically around the Black Lives Matters movement and social justice. And, I think this speaks to action and backing up your words, right? It's super easy for brands to slap up an image on Instagram and say some really nice stuff and then just move on. Well, you know what? That's just not acceptable anymore. You can't do that as a company. You can't do that as a brand. Consumers don't accept that. They shouldn't accept that. Your employees won't accept that, right? That's just not how you want to operate in this era that we're in. And I think that's just so important to stress. And for Wayfair, we in this situation, I think there's a balance, right? You need to act swiftly. You need to speak. You don't want to be silent. You want to show support, but you want to be thoughtful. You want to do it in the right way and make sure it's something that you can build to and that you're going to long-term commit to. So you can't just do those things rashly, right? But in this case, similar to Mariana's example, our CEO got out early with a really heartfelt letter that he had written himself, and he's a super action-oriented guy. Anybody knows him. And so immediately he's like, look, here's some things we can do really right now. Here's some things right now, but there's so much more we have to learn and conversations to have, and I'm dedicated and focused on making these things happen. And some of those things were, in a way, kind of easy. Like one thing was, we immediately implemented a program where all of our employees have paid time off to vote. So no matter where they work, they can vote. They can get out there and have their voice heard and be a part of the, of the change that people want to make happen. And another piece was, doubling our employee match to all the different, funds and organizations that are helping with this movement, and doing that and seeing the progress we're making there as a brand, and all the work we're doing internally. But I think as communicators, we have a lot on our plate because we have to help shape this and guide this, but then we have to be the ones who are there to make sure we deliver on this, right? We have to keep this a priority day after day, month after month. When the headlines are gone and the stories, die down, it's not just that you're on to the next thing. As our role, we're building the trust, we're building the connection with the brand, and we need to make sure that our words ring true and stay true, and that we build those programs and we build those initiatives that are going to really show who we are and what we stand for as a company, and solidify that connection with employees and consumers and all of our stakeholders. So I think it's a tremendously exciting time, but it's certainly challenging and some uncharted waters for sure. But, it's great to be a part of it right now. So that's all I have for slides if we want to open up to questions and discussion.
Super, thanks. That was really great, Jane. I really appreciated the remarks, and especially about sticking with it. It's not something you just start and in a slapdash way, but being thoughtful about it and continuing on.
And Mariette, if I could just add one more thing, just I think is really important that came up earlier, and I think it was Gary who brought it up, but that partnership with talent now, right? And that being so integral. I feel like communications and talent, and I'm sure Mariana, you feel and see the same thing. This is a partnership that's inseparable. You have to be in lockstep. All of these things are so linked. And the culture piece and working with the C-suite and shaping that. And it's just a really exciting time, I think, as a communicator, as a leader in the company. You really are working so much across the organization in every aspect of the company, which I think is just so exciting for the profession.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we have some great questions. I'm going to just jump into them. And the first one really builds on what Jane was just saying, which is, did it just disappear on me? No. Oh, I see. Somebody answered the record. Yes, the recording will be available. The Carolyn asked that will be out on when it moves to past events. There'll be a link and you can watch it later on YouTube. So we have a question from Maya, which builds on what Jane was just talking about. So these past few months have ignited a fire, with quotes, within organizations to engage in the corporate social justice concept Professor Sheffer mentioned. How can COOs and communication professionals within organizations keep the momentum going when the news cycle shifts? What will be the key takeaways to keep in mind as communication teams shift from crisis response to crisis preparedness? Anybody wants to take that? Would you like to start, maybe, Jean?
Sure. I think the really important thing is to remember that, you have to build that story and the truth of that story over time. And it takes a lot of small things and big things. And so I think there's an opportunity to keep the conversation going. And, whether it's just small milestones or it's bigger initiatives, but being very transparent, right? So whether you're, publishing your objectives and your goals for diversity within the organization and reporting on that and the progress that you're making, holding yourself accountable to that, sharing that information and following up again and again and making that a priority is so important. This isn't done overnight. And like all things in communications, and I think this is kind of applies to almost anything that we work with, is you have to build that story. It does not happen overnight. It takes weeks and months and years to build the narrative, to get through to people, to show that that's really what you're about. So it's hard work, but you've got to be in it for the long term.
Mariana, you look like you had, thank you.
Yeah, I would just add that I think too, as a company, you have to consider your role in some of the root causes of what's happening in the world. So, I love the conversation around election, census. Those things are actionable items that we can take as citizens of this country to actually empower change. For Verizon specifically, what we've really started to focus on is not only how do we continue to listen and learn, but how do we have a much stronger community engagement model, and how do we do our part in terms of building talent and a talent pipeline that actually helps members of the Black community overcome some of the kind of systemic issues that tend to hold them back. Also a question for technology. I mean, you think about education and what that can do and how it can change the trajectory of someone's lives. Technology really can educate you, it can empower you, it can energize you. And I think for us, it's about how do we make sure we are doing all of those things all the time. In terms of keeping it in the news cycle, the latter is what's going to allow, me as a communications professional to keep it in the news cycle more so than the former, because the former everyone's kind of focused on. And I think for us, that's something that we're certainly looking towards, and especially when we talk about 5G, AR, VR, how we can transform people's experience in society, or even help build empathy, to Jane's point, by creating virtual experiences where you can see what it's like to actually walk in someone else's shoes. I think those are all things that we're really looking closely at right now.
Thank you.
Mariette, I would just add quickly that you have to get to the underlying causes of what's happening, and companies have to put a spotlight on that and embrace the awkwardness of doing that. I believe that 3 of the Fortune 100 CEOs, or at least in the US anyway, have African-American CEOs. The numbers for boards are even worse. And I think companies are going to have to embrace the fact that they haven't done as well as they should have. And for the CCO, that is the advocacy and courage role that I talked about really briefly in my slides, is that you have to understand inside the organization that your people will judge you by consistency, by the long-term outlook that you're taking, and a sincerity to actually address the issue. I fear as a citizen that, after Parkland, the terrible shooting in Parkland, we all thought that was going to change the way we address gun regulation, gun laws, et cetera. And it did not, for whatever reason. And in this case, I fear that we could lose momentum. A communicator, however, can use data to show that this really is a seminal moment in human rights and civil society. And if you look at some of the data around public discussions and community discussions on race since the George Floyd murder, you see it dwarfs all other issues, even Parkland and some of the other terrible tragedies. This has ignited something in the country. It's your job within the company, the enterprise, to help your executives understand that.
So I have another question from Maya, since she got them in. I think she deserves to get them heard first. This also refers to some comments that I think Professor Sheffer had. Gary, you mentioned how corporations are beginning to ask themselves if they're ready to take on government responsibilities. And the question is also to Mariana and to Jane, do you feel your companies see themselves as engaging in this year's election? And if so, how's your response to the COVID-19 pandemic and racism in America influencing your role, as companies in November elections?
That's a very full question. I'm happy to start. So I think in terms of government, full disclosure, we actually work closely. We have an entire public sector team that is focused on providing critical infrastructure connectivity needs for government agencies, for state and local agencies, first responders, school boards, universities of higher education, all of the above. But I think if I'm hearing the question right, it's really the question of, are we moving past the point of political politeness where we think companies will actually take a stand? And I think the answer is yes and no, if I'm being quite honest. I think yes, in terms of giving employees the power and the ability to fulfill their civic duties. So I love that Wayfair is allowing for paid time off. Verizon also does the same, where you can take personal time to go and vote and do that. We've also just started a big push behind the census, because we do think that is super critically important when you talk about some of those root systemic issues. Representation is very key. But I think broadly, the government's not going to get there on their own. And so what that means is, I don't know that Verizon would ever come out and say, we support X candidate, but would they come out and say, we are here to support our government and support our employees' rights? 100%. So that would be where the no kind of comes into play a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Mariana. I mean, I think that, you have to be, it's about empowering your people and your audiences to get out there and to be engaged in the process and to vote and to have a voice. And it's about opening up the dialogue internally to hear those voices, to encourage the difficult conversations. I think that is so important. Encouraging the volunteering in the community and all of that. But it's a tricky line to walk, for sure. I don't think it's hard for a company these days, especially a big brand, a mass brand, a Verizon, a Wayfair, to get out and pick a political side of things. Unfortunately, we're living in a world where everything is so highly politicized, and that's crazy, right? It's crazy. So we have to navigate that as companies and brands. And so, but I think but what that doesn't mean is that you're not going to stand up for what you believe is right, right? So there are fundamental things, such as the social injustice movement taking place now. There are fundamental things, I think, as a company, you can recognize and acknowledge that are very much tied to your mission, your values, and who you are, and that you can get out there and you can move the needle on those things. But I do believe in starting first within your walls, within your company. I think Gary touched on this, right? So, what are you doing to source diverse talent? What are you doing in the organization to root out unconscious bias? What are you doing to train your people? What are you doing to develop the talent once it comes in the door? And all of those things. And, we have a myriad of different programs focused on that, but there's so much more to do. And then that's part of the big thing too, is acknowledging what you need to do as a good corporate citizen for your people within your walls. That is so important. But yeah, it's a yes and no, I think. Mariana.
Mariette, I would just say quickly, get involved in progress, not politics.
Yep.
Right? That's what companies, I think, have to move to. And there's many, many things, that's sort of simplistic for me to say that, but I think that's a good mindset. And when I talked about being a systems thinker, having that holistic view of the world, you know, some companies who've put out very effective and emotional statements about George Floyd and Black Lives Matter also make political donations to people who don't have a 0 rating, let's say, from the NAACP. Companies are going to have to struggle with that. They're going to have to resolve that and be open about it. I think that gets you on the side of progress, not politics. And political donations are a very complex issue with many considerations, but it's something communicators should be looking at right now.
Yeah, I love that call for progress in general. And also, I just want to thank, we've hit the hour. In fact, we're just 1 minute past. So I'm sorry, I'm going to need to wrap up. I think we could have spoken with you and heard from you all for the rest of the afternoon. It was really, really useful and inspiring. Please join me, everybody, in thanking our wonderful speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean Marriott. That went by so quickly, too.
It's like lightning, right?
Excellent.
We'll have to do it again. You know, so thanks to everybody who's watching for joining today. It was really a fascinating conversation. And I just want to remind us all that you can find future events just like this one on the COM website. If you're looking for a recording, there'll be a recording up of this one as well. And for staff, faculty, and students next week, on June 24th, we hope you can join Boston University for a university-wide event called A Day of Collective Engagement, racism and anti-racism, our realities and our roles. There'll be a website up soon with more info, but I just thought I should flag that while we're here together. And thanks again so much, Mariana, Jane, and Gary. That was fantastic. Can't wait to talk to you again and to see what you all do. Thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.
Thanks.